Morning, everyone, and welcome to our September episode of Road to Recovery, our series of commentaries on the COVID-19 crisis and the aftermath. Every month, we talk to business and thought leaders to share what the pandemic has taught us and to think together with our listeners about what this means for the future of HR, finance, technology, and work generally. So for most businesses coming out of the pandemic, digital transformation is right at the top of the agenda. But this can only be successful if we bring our colleagues on that journey with us. So that is what we're going to be talking about today, how to drive successful digital transformation, etc. So I'm Tom Holmes, founding director of Brand Performance, which is a technology agnostic consultancy that helps businesses to solve their HR and finance problems and bring digital transformation to the back office. And today I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Georgina Wistow, who has over 20 years of experience of applying psychology to the change of leaders and businesses. And she's going to be sharing both theoretical and her practical experience and theoretical experience today from well-known, from various businesses, global businesses and telecoms businesses, etc. she's been working for. So hi, Georgina, good morning.
Hi, Tom, lovely to see you.
I also thought it would be fun to bring Becky Statham to the webinar. She's also a business psychologist, and she's going to weave some of the success stories from the business psychology approach she's been applying to change as part of the brand team. So I thought it'd be really interesting to get some practical perspectives from that. So hi, Becky, good morning.
Hello, looking forward to it.
Brilliant. So I've got some questions to talk us through, but for everyone listening, if you wish to put any questions to our panelists, please put them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and I'll try and pick them up as we go. But to kick off, so Georgina, from a psychology point of view, why is digital transformation so difficult, even though it's so necessary to so many businesses?
Well, I think change in general is quite difficult for people. Our brains are optimized for pattern recognition, so we're quite lazy. We like things that we know. And then when we come across something that we don't know, then we immediately get that fear of the unknown. What's going to happen? What's happening to me? Why is this happening? What will it look like? And I think particularly for back office functions like HR and finance, they've often been underinvested in. They sometimes haven't had the same amount of ongoing change that we invest in our customer facing parts of the organization. And so when this happens, there's this immediate kind of fear of what's going to happen. And I think that then is underpinned by, what does this mean for me and my value, personally for me, my professional values, but also my value to the organization? Does that erode with this change? So if I'm an HR business partner and I've been a power behind the throne, throwing lots of data and spreadsheets and policy at the MD that I support, what happens when they can self-serve all of that and my value base starts to shift? So I think if we don't manage that sort of normal and natural transition that we have to go through psychologically, we can have as many change plans as we want to do the actual physical necessities of moving, but our people get lost along the way.
Right. So your prognosis is that whereas in the front office, people are used to products and things changing on a daily and weekly basis. We're retrained in the new product we've got or the adjustment to a product, and then we're out. And that's a natural part of month to month, quarter to quarter activity. All the sales team, all the marketing team, etc., are retrained in new products. It's different in the back office where we're more used to a situation of looking for the service we provide and then providing that service over a long time, and are less adept and used to constant change.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons in there. The first is finance and HR are heavily regulated, so the amount of change is brought to as small as possible because of those regulations. But also, I think when it is internal, it's quite hard to prove a return on investment. And so the amount of times you hear HR people say, oh, we're the cobbler's children, you know, the investment goes outside, but inside we're working off spreadsheets and Word documents and all of those things. So I think part of it is psychologically we've got very entrenched in the way we do things, and part of it is actually it's real. You know, some of those areas haven't had investment and some of those areas don't change.
So yes, absolutely. So we're saying that actually digital transformation is a big challenge for the back office, and for the good reasons you've described. Becky, what's your perspective? Why do you think that businesses find that digital transformation so difficult?
I was just getting my notepad out, actually, my old school notepad, because Georgina, something that you just said was quite interesting. You know, around
everyone's frozen.
Oh, that's good. I'm still here, so I think, Tom, it's just you. I'll carry on.
Yeah, I can see you.
You know, you make a point about, you know, HR feeling like the investment goes to, you know, the front office and, you know, and customers and things like that. And then, you know, it's always a pressure to kind of reduce cost and reduce effort and increase efficiency in the back office. But, and that's kind of true, because when we create business cases, for example, we're always teaching HR not to put into the business case all the improvements that it will bring to HR, because they come to us and they say it's going to make our lives easier, we'll have less admin, you know, we'll be able to spend more time doing other things, I won't have to do so much manual checking. And so we actually coach HR and finance to think about their customers, you know, the employees, which kind of backs up your point, which is that, you know, even when HR is creating a business case for investment in their function, it's all about everyone else, and we coach them to do that because it, you know, it makes the business case more compelling. So that's quite interesting, you know, around who, I guess, you know, making a kind of multi-lens business case that, you know, it's going to be an improvement for everyone. I think also businesses are starting to realise that change management is important, and they talk about it a lot at the beginning. But what we see is as soon as they buy technology, it does become a technology project, because all the timelines are driven by technology design being signed off, technology testing, technology go live. The project plan, you know, the project management, the weekly reporting is all based around the technology. Even when the intention set out is to, you know, to deliver a change program, they might even set up a change work stream. But all of the milestones and the outcomes tend to be based around the technology being switched on, rather than roles being changed or behaviours changing, or, you know, indicators that the culture is shifting.
That's very interesting. So again, on the front office, the creation of the new product, whatever that is, which is going to be delivered to customers, is seen as step one. Then the training and the change exercise of communicating it to the people who are going to sell it and deliver it is taken as a very serious and long-standing activity. But you're saying in back office, people forget that and focus solely on what is that service, not the change which people, the digital transformation people need to go through to be able to deliver it successfully.
Yeah, and we deliver digital transformation as a project or a program, don't we? You know, by definition, we tend to have a project or a program. So it's got a beginning and it's got an end. And actually what we're trying to teach at the moment with our SaaS mindset is that might be a catalyst. It might be kind of the kickstart, but the SaaS mindset and being able to change constantly and evolve doesn't stop when you go live. You know, and quite often businesses think very last minute about how they will manage, you know, the constant software updates, you know, in the very least, but more that constant shift in behavior and attitude about continuous improvement and being agile, and also admitting that maybe things that were implemented in the program are not quite right, and actually maybe they need to be unpicked or changed in the future, and that's okay too, rather than, you know, this is the design, we're going to move there and then it's done.
Right, so we're not talking about digital transformation being a point-to-point thing. We're doing this, we need to do that in the future. You're describing a situation where actually it becomes a journey which is continuous, and that continuous change, that continuous improvement is part of what we mean by digital transformation. I wonder, Georgina, what impact COVID has had on people's ability to change and adapt and adopt that digital transformation and new ways of working. Do you think it has had an impact?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think what's been surprising for me was that I expected it to be a really tough impact, but actually there's been some unexpected gifts that it's given us as well. So, I mean, it's undeniably challenging when we put people into a threat state. And by that, I mean, there's a piece, and I always point to where it is in my head, but there's a piece of our brain that is checking our environment every 1/5 of a second, 5 times a second, to see if we are safe or not. Mm-hmm. So during a very long period, our systems have been getting a message from our brains that says, this is not safe. And what that means is we're prepared for something. Now, this bit of my brain that I'm pointing to, which is kind of in the back here, doesn't understand the difference between a social threat of stay in your house and being chased by a lion. So it prepares us as if, and in fact, it prepares as if we're being chased by a T-Rex, because it's a very ancient bit of our brain. So it's kind of like when the smoke alarm goes off, but actually you just had a shower that's too hot. So our bodies have been in this constant threat state, and that can be very exhausting. So when you layer on top other change, you've got people going through multiple change curves. But this is what Becky's saying about SaaS is multiple change curves. And what COVID has really allowed us to do is understand a number of things. One is that we can survive when the ground is constantly shifting. Right. So we've been in a situation recently where we've had to adapt to unclear guidelines. We don't really know what's going to happen. We make plans and they disappear. We also got into a situation really quickly where we had to trust each other. So autonomy in organizations went up, because I used to work in an organization where if you said, oh yeah, Tom's a home worker, the next words out of the leader's mouth would be, bet he's got a nice garden. Because they just assume that when you're at home, you're doing absolutely zero work. And yet what we've discovered is that when you make people masters of their own destiny, because people want self-sovereignty, when you give them the opportunity to have autonomy, they make good decisions, they commit to you, and they're much more engaged in the organization, because A, they feel much more ownership of it because they're making decisions, but B, when all the decisions in organizations are sucked to the top of the organization, there's a view that the organization has a self-orientation towards the leaders. They're making the decisions, they'll make the decisions for what suits them. And that undermines all the good stuff leaders do to ask their people to trust them. So when the perception of self-orientation goes down, trust in organizations goes up. So it's not just about me feeling more trusted by my leader to make decisions and do things because they're not watching me all the time, but also the fact that I feel more trust for my leader because they're giving me that. I think the final thing that I would say is we've got a bit more used to it not being perfect. So I know when I've put in HR systems in the past, there's been this huge anxiety that, you know, when it goes live, so we have these big go, no-go spreadsheets that tick off every, you know, is it going to be pink when it goes live, or is there any spelling mistakes, etc., etc. And actually, because we all suddenly got sent home and our stuff wasn't quite right, and we might not have had the right chair or the right laptop or a screen or whatever, we just had to make do. So we've let go of some of that need that we have for everything to be perfect all the time, and started to think about incrementally shifting to what the end state will be. And that mindset of being able to say it will get incrementally better and I'm part of that process is exactly what's needed to underpin multiple change curves and the SaaS mindset that Becky was talking about.
I see. So you're saying that or you're explaining that the challenges of the last couple of years have made us more receptive and more capable to embrace digital transformation. Because, and I think I think I got them right. I think that the first is that because our teams are not so fearful and know that they can survive very significant challenges. So it's not kind of, there's a cliff over there and it will be a disaster if we go over it. It's like, oh, there's another little challenge to be solved. So that ability to know that we can survive and thrive even in adversity is important. The second is that trust element, that it's a kind of two-way thing, which is that because COVID has meant that we've had to trust people more, then they have taken more responsibility and are able to be trusted more, and they're building confidence. And then I think that third element you described, which is not seeking perfection, which is that, you know, during COVID, we've discovered that we can make changes, we have to make changes which are imperfect. And yet actually that's okay. That's better than not making the change itself. That's really fascinating, Georgina. How can businesses and therefore leaders make digital transformation and tell a digital transformation story which is more positive and about benefiting the business and the people in the business? So to be able to sell digital transformation and this transition, we've got to speak about it positively. But how do we do this, connecting it up to all that stuff you've mentioned?
Yes, I mean, the first thing that I would say is, we've got to keep thinking about that trust equation. So are we credible? Are we reliable? Are we intimate? So are we sharing this journey with our people? So I will always say to leaders, the truth is always dignified. Sometimes a change that is coming might not be perfect for everybody. It might create opportunity, but it might also mean that there is a big shift for some people. And I think one of the things that happens, and I think if we can tie this back to our need for perfection, one of the things that happens is leaders don't say anything until they know the full story. They want to be able to give people certainty. So I don't want to say we're starting this journey, we're not super sure how it's going to end for you, Becky, but we'll get there together. And my commitment to you is that I'll keep talking to you and I'll give you information. So they don't say anything. Our people will intuit that something is up. And if we're not telling that story, they tell it to themselves. And the thing is, when we see and hear things around us, we tell ourselves a story and we have an emotional response to that story and we act on that. And that's why we lose people in change journeys, because we are not saying, look, we're not super sure exactly what it's going to look like at the end. But what we do know is we'll give you a safe space in which you can tell us what you're worried about. We'll try and answer all the questions. If we don't have the answers, we'll go and get them. And if we can't get them right now, we'll say to you, we just don't know what that's going to look like, but we will make some commitments to you. So we can ride some of those waves of not having all the answers, allowing people in and to be intimate with us and to say, yeah, we're going on this journey with you at the same time. But really the point that I'm making is we have to start talking about it straight away. So we have to start thinking about what do our people want to know and creating spaces. So in organizations where I've done this in the past, we've just done focus groups where we said, tell us everything you're worried about. That gives us a really good chance to start building things like FAQs and little, vignettes and little videos that say all of these things that you're worried about, we either know the answers to or we're still working on and we'd love your opinion on. We do open houses, we do gallery walks, we do all sorts of things that help people to feel like they've got a safe space that they can bring their problems. And then as we get to understand what people are worried about, we build our story around those are the things that our people are worried about. So those are the stories we have to tell about what will happen in this instance, what will happen in that instance.
So you've explained something to me which is really fundamental there, Georgina, which is I've heard this talk about the trust equation and the trust relationship, but you've really brought to life to me how telling the truth and telling what you know about the truth is a corollary of that. So truth builds trust, and trust is related to hearing the truth. I guess that's been very true throughout the last couple of years, the pandemic, which is we can tell when people aren't telling us the full truth and the full story, and we absolutely hate it. And when they do come out and tell us the truth, even if it's unpalatable, we feel like we're informed, and that grows the trust. And the application of that to digital transformation and stuff, even if it's unpalatable, getting that truth out and really discussing it, we can trust our team members to treat that at face value and responsibly.
Yeah, so all of those things that make up trust, are you credible? Do you do the things you say you will do? Are you letting people see the real you, and are you seeing the real them? They're all undermined by any sense that people have that you or the business is in it for themselves. Mm-hmm. So all of those things are divided by the self-orientation of the organization. What that means is if we say nothing or we try and whitewash it, that trust immediately starts to erode, because our people intuit that they're not getting the full story, and then immediately they believe that something is going on that's not going to be good for them. And even if then you try to shift to, okay, well, you didn't buy that, so we'll get a bit closer to the truth, often the damage is already done, and people have either disengaged in a way that they're still here and you're still paying for them, but they're not actually supporting you. They're at best wishing you luck, or they just go to a different organization. And I know you talked about the Great Resignation a couple of weeks ago, but the way organizations have managed change, particularly through the COVID-19 issue that we've had, I think has really changed people's perceptions of their organization, and that's part of the reason that some people have self-selected out of those organizations.
You said something really interesting to me, which you mentioned earlier, but the penny dropped as you were just speaking there as well, which is actually timeliness of this. So not saying anything is as bad as saying something which is not true and damages trust as much. So this. Often I think, well, look, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say, so I'll say nothing. But actually, that you're describing that as damaging, as if I was saying something which was wrong.
Yeah, it's the monster under the bed. If you don't say anything, and what happens is two things. Firstly, people intuit that something's going on, so they see things, they hear things, and they make their own story up from that. Mm-hmm. And that story is never going to be as good as any story that you're going to tell, because it's made up. And then their emotional response to that is what they act on. The other thing is, obviously, when you don't say something and they think you know something, that trust starts to erode. And so it works in a negative impact both ways. And if you don't have something to say, then say that. One of the things about trust is that intimacy piece, the relationship you have with people, being able to say to them, do you know what, I know you think that as your leader, I should have the answer to this, but I genuinely don't. What I will commit to is keeping talking to you.
Very interesting.
And all of this reminds me, this makes me think of the company updates. So we started during lockdown weekly company updates, because normally we'd be in the office, or we'd at least have some drinks kind of quite regularly before lockdown. And then when we went into lockdown and we started working from home, we did these weekly updates. So every Friday at 4 o'clock, Tom and I would talk to the whole company very openly about the pipeline of work and how we were doing, and who was on furlough, who we were able to bring back. And there were some weeks where we thought, well, we don't really have much of an update. It's only been 5 days, but we jumped on the call anyway, even if the call was brief. And I think people really liked that it was very, it was predictable. So it was at the same time every single week, and they knew that they could turn up, and they knew that we would cover, business development, people development, training opportunities, volunteering, or whatever it might be, and then a positive story. So there was kind of a set structure each week, which I think they really liked. And we talked about this on the Great Resignation webinar with Michael Esau, which was that loyalty to Varan and to our cause, our digital transformation cause, was highest during lockdown and during remote working. And I think it was partly because of that constant communication. And there must have been something about the way, Tom, you were communicating in a very open way that did make people feel, people said, look, I was a bit worried about job security. It was an uncertain time. We're a consultancy business. Was that essential to what was going on in the world and everything? But people said, we felt that Tom and Helen were loyal and looked after us, and therefore we felt loyal back. And it wasn't like,
well,
well,
yeah,
you know,
I mean, I guess so. I think about that particular topic. Of course, the issue was that job security is and was an issue at that time. Nobody knew whether they were going to have a job at the end of the month or the end of the quarter in almost any industry, and the answer was nobody knew. But actually sharing that and saying you're right to be worried, but there is no answer at the moment, and all you can be assured of is that most companies are doing their absolute best to look after their team members and colleagues first. So, very interesting description of principles and values rather than certainty on information, actually. And there's so much to learn from the last couple of years, I think. So, Becky, have you got some other examples of where you've seen digital transformation doing interesting things or being successful?
Yeah, there was there's one that came up recently that I really like, actually. So this was an armed services organization, and they wanted to modernize, HR, modernize the back office, bring in digital tools, and they did a big kind of activity where all of the back office teams, so all of the HR people, the finance people, they made a huge list of all the possible improvements that they could make, which is fantastic. That's really good. So everyone from the back office has bought in. But they hadn't really asked the employees and managers what it was that they wanted and they found important. So when we create business cases, we quite often go out to maybe 30 or 40 people, different departments, different levels, people that have been here a long time, people that have just joined. But what I really liked about this organization and what we did there is we set up a survey, a digital survey, because that meant that we could reach 4,300 people. So 4,300 people responded about what mattered to them, what was important at work, what wasn't so important. So they ranked, some of their priorities. And it meant that the organization had basically a list of priorities around which they could build their digital transformation story. So it moved away from just the things that the back office team had brainstormed and focused on what these 4,300 people had said was important. And actually, being in the armed services, it was all around stability and kind of being able to plan time with their family. So, they were more keen to understand, when am I going to be home for Christmas? In which months can I take my kids to school? What's the rotation going to be? And also things very tactical, like, can I do some of that learning that I've been doing at home? Can you create a tool so that I don't have to come in and do that training, and I can actually do it in my own time and see my family more? Which sounds really obvious, but they weren't the priorities that the HR and finance team thought of. So I thought that was quite a neat example, expanding even further the number of people involved in telling the story, basically.
It's really interesting, isn't it? These tools to poll people en masse are quite new. Well, that's not quite true. They're not new, but the ones which work are quite new and which are easy to do. And so many of our companies and businesses are asking their team members and colleagues to complete those things. And the weird thing is, I think that a lot of people think they're just an extra or an add-in or something like that, when actually it's an important part of their weekly work to complete those kind of surveys and those questionnaires to give information back to the centre as any other thing which they're doing in their week. We've got to try and find a way of helping our colleagues and team members in broader organisations to kind of prioritize doing that kind of feedback and assessment, because it's quite tough, and it is no longer the case, I think, that 20 years ago people would have quite rightly said, well, I fill in these things and off they go and nobody takes any notice of them. That's not true anymore, right, Georgina?
It's absolutely not true. It's absolutely. And it was interesting. I was working with one of the world's biggest aviation companies recently, and I was delivering a leadership development academy for them. And one of the things that the leaders said was, we ask our people every year to fill in this engagement survey and absolutely nothing happens. And I said to them, well, the first thing I want to say to you is that the conversation that brought me into the organization was your HR director saying, I'm taking pelters on the leadership scores in the survey. And so I am the reason. And part of it is just that simple thing of not connecting back the dots and not saying, you asked us for this, and therefore we're giving it to you. And part of it is that the survey is done once a year. And sometimes the actions that we have to do off the back of those surveys take quite a long time to get through, 6 million, decision makers in order to do things. So you've got to try and balance lots of little things with some big things. One of the things that I saw recently, I was in an organization that did surveys quarterly, and it just became an industry of the survey, and also quite a lot of competition for, what did you get? Oh, I got this, because you were getting scores all the time. But I saw an organization recently that had on the front page of their internal site a thing that allowed them to say, how are you feeling today?
We have that, Georgina.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and it's always on. It's always on. It's always there. So we do remind people each Wednesday to fill it in, if they haven't. But yeah, it just sits there open all the time. It's so much easier. And then as an SLT, we review it once a month, and there'll be, there might be small actions, like you said. It doesn't become such an industry. And people might just write a couple of lines, but they write it as and when they feel it.
Mm-hmm. And it is really important, particularly in change, because you talked quite a lot about business cases. Business cases aren't really that compelling when you're telling a change story. So I was working with an organization a couple of years ago where the MD said, right, we're going for 10x. You can tell it was an American organization, 10x. And in his head, 10x meant we're going to take the growth we had last year, and over the next 5 years, we're going to times it by 10. But it just became that everyone was like 10x, 10x, 10x. Nobody, like 2 levels below him, knew what 10x meant. One of the finance people put together a spreadsheet for everyone to fill in to say how they were going to get their little bit of the organization 10 times better than it was over the, it was absolutely confusing for everybody about how we operationalize 10x. And actually the MD had a conversation in a room where he was like, I think we should go for that. What has to happen then is we have to make that meaningful for the people in the organization to say, okay, our North Star looks like this, but your bit of that, the bit that you do every day, the bit that you contribute to, looks like this. And it's meaningful and helpful and resonates with me and is real and something I can grab hold of. So when we do an HR or digital transformation and we say, it's going to be an 11.7 million saving, or we're going to make a headcount saving, or things are going to be faster, it doesn't resonate for people. We have to think about, what's my daily life now? What are the things I'm worried about? And rather than selling it as something that benefits somebody who I'm not, think about what would I want to know about this and what's important, because change actually, we are hardwired for change. We have babies, we move houses, we change jobs, we attach ourselves to another human being, supposedly for life. And yet, if you try and change a system in an organization, because we don't understand when, if I decide that I am going to move house, I am the business case for that. I already know how I came to that decision and why I came to that decision. And so all I have to do now is execute all the things that need to happen for me to move house. In an organization, when I start to talk about change, I really need to start saying, it's not about the business case. It's about what was happening in the context of this organization that meant that this was the right change. And what does that mean then for why I now have to change as an individual? What will happen to me? When will it happen? And why is it happening to me? And that's the bit I think that we miss when we talk about business cases. And going out to the group of people you went out to and said, what is meaningful to you? What will resonate for you in this change we are doing? Took it well away from, we're going to make all of these savings, to in your daily life, we want to make things better for you.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting because the moving house example is quite interesting in the sense that we do have stakeholders around it, but they're quite a limited number, and we are very good at managing those different stakeholders. So, in my household, I've got the partner, the daughters, the pets, and then I've got family and relatives, and they all are stakeholders in this. And that discussion about, we're thinking about potentially getting a bigger house or a smaller house or moving to here or whatever, we naturally adjust that conversation to the concerns of each of those stakeholders we're talking to. And, so with my mother, it's thinking about, how much harder or easier it will be for her to visit, and whether there's a space for her should she wish to, that kind of thing. With my daughters, it's whether the pets are going to be happy and going to have enough space, and how they're going to be transitioned, and all this kind of thing. And this is very delicate listening and thinking about an overall change, but then talking to each of the impacted parties with delicacy. And I guess it's also, by doing that consultation, it's giving them a chance to control some of the aspects of it, Georgina.
It is. What it also does is it highlights, and I think this is quite important in change, it highlights what's not changing. So what's not changing is we are still a unit. We'll just be a unit somewhere else. And actually what you guys did doing your weekly catch-ups during COVID was highlight that connection that we've got. So, all the other ground might be shifting, but we're still here for you. And I think that's what we miss a little bit, I think, is sometimes we stop saying, we say everything's changing, rather than, do you know what, our business still does this. We are still HR professionals. We'll be HR professionals or finance professionals executing it in a different way or adding a different value to the organisation, but we're concentrating on some of the ground that is not shifting. And we naturally do that. I remember when we moved house when I was little, saying to my mum, but where will I go to school? And her being able to say to me, actually, it's still the same school that we were targeting all along. You just go, well, that's one thing that I don't have to worry about, because I'll still see my friends every day.
So that's fascinating to me, Georgina. So you're describing of mapping a change journey by describing what isn't going to change, what is solid, what values remain, actually. And I think that's really interesting, actually, because most change teams and digital transformations, it's all about what's going to be different, what's going to be better, etc. But you're saying from a psychology angle, actually focusing on what stays the same and what's the connecting factor to what we're doing now. And now you said it, of course, is absolutely obvious, but it's really fascinating how rarely that angle of what is not changing is addressed directly.
Yeah, what are the anchor points and what are the focal points, and what's the ground I'm standing on? If everything's changing, I'm not standing on any ground, and then it's all unknown, and then I'm, so immediately we start to spin. But if I know I'm standing on solid ground, and with digital transformation, one of the things that's really important for the leaders to think about is, I'm going through this change at the same time as my people. And therefore, if I am going to be an anchor point for them, what does it mean for me and the way I show up for them? Because if I'm in absolute chaos and disarray, then I stop being the solid ground they can stand on. So to an extent,
so Becky, Bex, can you give us a couple of examples about how
I'm dying
to maintain that control, etc.?
Yeah, because one of the biggest ways of letting go of control, and one of the biggest fears at the moment, I think, is about automation. So, Tom, a couple of years ago, we started running webinars, didn't we, and breakfast seminars on robotic process automation. It was this cool new thing that was coming in. It was going to reduce all of our manual tasks, make our lives so much easier, and we would just be able to swan around and spend time, chatting with people, and we'd never have to be at our desks anymore. So it had this kind of big promise, and the opportunity was big. But, people were thinking, if bits of my job are automated, what do I do in that time? Do I have any control over you know, when that happens and how it happens and what's the output going to be, and if it goes wrong, do I get blamed? So there was quite a lot of fear, and a lot of those workshops that we were running at the time were to alleviate some of that fear, and it was around control. So what we did in a central government organisation where we designed and we deployed robots. So we deployed 4 robots, particularly around resourcing. There was a lot of manual checking, you know, what's the status of that candidate? Have they submitted all their files? What's the vetting status? What we did there is, first of all, training. So I know this is obvious, and lots of businesses deliver training as part of their change programs. But it was really important that we actually got them certified in robotic process automation, and that gave them this real sense of pride and self-efficacy. So in health and fitness and things like that, the number one factor as to whether somebody will succeed or not in their, you know, their marathon or their weight loss journey or whatever it might be, is a belief that they can do it. So giving them this certificate, you know, this certification around RPA really helped. And also what it did was, we actually said to them, right, now that you're trained in robotic process automation, which processes do you want to automate? So they had that level of control over which processes we started with. And also we had an interim state where, instead of the robots doing stuff in the background and people kind of wondering what's happening because it's invisible and is it happening on my laptop, or, you know, in the cloud, where is this stuff happening? We had an interim state where the people in the government organisation had to trigger, they had to press start basically on these robots in the beginning. So they could come in the morning, they could do their tasks, and they could say, right, now I want the robot to go and check, you know, those 5,000 candidates and see where they are in the vetting process. So they would literally click start, and that gave them such a sense of control. And then once the robots had done all of their tasks, they got a notification which said, you know, here's all the results. So all of these robots have done these things, you know, here are the outputs. Do you want to go to the next step? So they had a bit more control in the beginning. So it would say, you know, if 15 of them need to go, you know, there, and we need to send these email notifications, and we need to ask these candidates for their next of kin, you know, do you want to proceed? And then they could say yes, and then that would trigger the next lot of activity from the robots. So instead of going straight from nothing to all of these, you know, all these automations kind of happening, there was that interim step. So I think that worked really well. And also they developed the roadmap for what robots would come in the future. So that gave them a real sense of control. And they became their assistants, basically, you know, rather than being a threat. So that was one really good success story. And another one is a tech firm that we're working with at the moment. And the role of the HR business partners and some of the kind of process owners is changing quite a lot. But what we're doing to bring a positive story, a positive spin on that, is in the future, you know, their processes will be different and they will be quite standardized, they will be global, so they will have to change. But they are forming a global community. So we're calling them a global community for accounts payable, you know, a global community for recruiting. And their role will be to reach out to different businesses and go to networking events and forums and speak to their peers and bring back ideas into the business about how they can future-proof and bring best practice to their area. So although their process is changing, their role and their responsibility will now be to make that even better. So it's subtle, but that doesn't always happen in organizations. Quite often it's, you know, come to the table, we're going to change your process and you'll have to deliver that in future. Whereas now it's about having this, you know, this global community that's all in charge of designing the future. Oh, Tom's gone, he's come back.
Yep, there he
What
is.
do you think of those, Georgina?
They both sound amazing. I think, you know, when you talk about self-sovereignty in terms of having that control over being able to do things, and also those baby steps, so that when we're managing that fear, it's not a quick switch over from old to new, but more, you know, a journey. And actually SaaS gives us a really good opportunity to manage some of that journey. But even that thing of actually, to begin with, we'll have you click start, and we'll have you get those reports so that you feel like you can be confident that in the quality, and that you can be confident it's happening at the right time. It just works so well for moving people really gently through that fear and through the change curve, because at some point people have to start coming up the other side and into acceptance, or you lose them entirely. And so being able to say to people, we're going to take this at a pace that doesn't expect you to jump from here to here without all the bits in the middle, really helps people understand that you understand. They will see that as someone getting where they're at emotionally.
So I've absolutely loved our chat today. Really interesting. What I've learned, amongst many things, is actually I've made a few notes. Firstly, about how the last 2 years of turmoil, disruption, and terrible events has actually generated kind of three things which we can take positively. The first of those is that belief and knowledge that we can survive these kind of things, and our teams understand that better. Secondly, that the levels of trust that we can do that, and that the trust between our colleagues, etc., not about what we're doing, but about how we're doing in our team is increased. And that final point which you made, Georgina, about not seeking perfection, and that ability to actually be looking for a journey rather than so much a destination. Then I was picking up on your advice and tips, which are, really around. First thing I've written down is truth. The truth is always dignified, which I think is a great phrase and really useful. And that's how you generate trust, by the truth versus trust in this kind of challenging digital journey which we're talking about. And then finally, the one which I'm really going to remember is actually that focus on what is staying the same and what is not changing, at the same time as acknowledging what is going to change and the advances we're making. And I think that's the one which is really sticking with me. You wouldn't think after 25 years of doing this that I'd have missed that, but I definitely feel that I should be focusing on that more in the transformation journeys we're doing. And Becky, thank you for all your great examples and conversations and tangible examples of how this has actually worked in practice. So I'd like to thank
I want one more plug before we close.
Yes, please.
So I've been reminded that this webinar was a constant throughout the pandemic, right? So we used to do it every week, didn't we? Which was a nightmare, because we'd have to, bring together people. But this is all about agility, right? So in the beginning, it was every week we did a webinar like this, and it was all about the changes brought about by the pandemic and how we would handle it. And so a reminder really to everyone on the call that all of those are available. They're on the website on the Insights tab, so you can watch them back anytime. And we've actually been nominated for an award for this webinar series. So big congratulations to Tom, who's been chairing this for basically 2 years. So the Business Culture Awards are happening next Tuesday, and we're up for an award for the Business Culture Consultancy of the Year. In Maine, because of this webinar, which has provided hopefully some stability and a predictable source of fun conversation over the last 18 months.
Well, it has been a bit of a journey. I'm not sure that I want to rewatch some of those early ones because it was both probably less good, but also things were happening so fast in that first few weeks. There was so much doubt, but the reassurance of our team of HR professionals, HR leaders, business psychologists brought to the colleagues in the audience, I think was absolutely wonderful, and to me, because it was, what we were sharing was that it indeed was a very difficult time, and that there were lessons to be learned from any business and every business, which, putting aside competition and everything else, what we're all really fascinated with was helping our way and navigating our way through what was very difficult times. So, thank you everybody this morning. Thank you again, Georgina, and thank you, Becky. And I'll look forward to the next session, which we're going to do in a couple of weeks' time. So thank you very much, and let's hope we win that award. Please don't bombard the award givers with too many of your support emails. I would hate that thought. Great, thanks a lot, and speak soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Becky.